I love stories about clueless clergy. I don't really know why, I just do. But here's a good one. A young rabbi was new to his synagogue. He was upset to find serious quarrels and divisions. During the Friday evening services, half of the congregants would stand up for this one part of the service while the other half remained seated. And eventually, sometimes, the ones who were standing yelled at the ones who were sitting to stand up. And the ones who were sitting shouted at the ones who were standing to sit down. Now, each group, of course, claimed that that group was right about the old tradition about sitting and standing. Well, this young rabbi was inexperienced, but he knew enough to go get some expert advice. So he got one representative from each side of the debate, one of the standers, one of the sitters, and they all went to go visit the synagogue's founder. The founder was a 95-year-old rabbi living in a retirement home. So they described to the old rabbi what was happening, and then a man from the standing up group said to the old man, "Rabbi, isn't it true that the tradition was always to stand for that part of the service?" The old man shook his head and said, "No, that wasn't the tradition." So the one from the sitting down group said, "Aha! Then the right thing is to remain seated then." The old rabbi said, "No, that wasn't the tradition either." So the new young rabbi says, "Rabbi, what we have now is complete chaos. Half the people stand and shout, the other half sit and scream." The rabbi said, "Ah, yes, that was the tradition." Now, this pattern of argument can be found in most faith communities at one time or another. And you know, it can also be found in the Bible itself. One of the striking things about the Bible, if you read the whole thing, is that it argues with itself. Now, in today's gospel reading, there is an argument between Jesus and the Sadducees, and it's an argument about how to interpret Scripture. The Sadducees stuck only to the first 5 books of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And they did not believe in life after death. And that's because in those first 5 books, you really can't find a clear promise of life after death. Jesus, on the other hand, agreed with the Pharisees on this issue. And you might be surprised by that, because in the gospel, Jesus argues so often with the Pharisees. And yet, Jesus and the Pharisees did agree on many issues. They did accept the first 5 books of the Bible, like the Sadducees did. But Jesus and the Pharisees also accepted the writings of the prophets and the wisdom books, what we call the rest of the Old Testament. And compared with the Sadducees, Jesus and the Pharisees were actually progressive and liberal. Now, all three, Jesus, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, were in the same faith community. Sure, they argued, but they argued based on the same religious tradition. For example, today, Jesus makes his argument based on the book of Exodus, which the Sadducees also accepted, using the idea of God being the God of the living. And so when God is called the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, long after their deaths on earth, Jesus says, God is God of the living, and so Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are still alive. So anyway, here's the question in all this. Could people disagree about the interpretation of the same texts, the same scriptures, and still remain in the same faith community? Good question, and it's still relevant. Think of our own particular Christian community, the Anglican communion around the world. We got our own particular start in England when back in the 16th century, the British Church broke away from the authority of the Pope. Well, from the start in this new kind of church, there were arguments. There were high church types who wanted to keep things as Catholic as possible without going back to the Pope's authority. There were low church types who wanted to make things as Protestant as possible. Disgracefully, these two groups sometimes killed each other in these disagreements all those hundreds of years ago. In America, our own Episcopal Church has had its arguments. During the Civil War, parts of our Episcopal Church defended slavery using the same Bible that other Episcopalians used to condemn slavery. There was even an Episcopal bishop who was a general in the Confederate Army. His name was Leonidas Polk. But the General Convention of the National Church refused to kick the Southern Diocese out of the church. They simply considered them absent from the National Convention meetings until after the war was over, and then they welcomed them back. 100 years later, in the 1970s, there was the issue of ordaining women. It was hard fought. There were people who left the Episcopal Church over this, but we ordained women as deacons, and then as priests, and then as bishops. And our faith community went on rather well, in fact. In the early 2000s, the Episcopal Church was deeply divided over issues of human sexuality. In the year 2003, the Episcopal Diocese of New Hampshire elected an openly gay man as their bishop. Huge disagreements emerged. There was a reporter from the Binghamton Press and Sun Bulletin who called all the Episcopal priests in the area to ask us what we thought. And I was quoted in this newspaper article back in 2002 or 3 saying that the church had done the right thing. 3 different St. Mark's families dropped out of our church because of what I said. Now, I have always told people that they can disagree with me and we can still be part of the same church family. But there have been a few over the years who could not accept the things I've said and left St. Mark's. You know, Jews and Christians have always had to reinterpret the Bible and our faith tradition to face the challenges of a new day. There has never been a time with a fixed, static set of meanings. So in spite of our arguments and our disagreements, can we stay in the same faith community? I hope so, and I will not give up that hope. I have found in the Episcopal Church a generosity of spirit, an openness, and a tolerance that I cherish. And it is needed now as much as in any time in history. You know, as well as I do, how divided our nation is right now. I love being an American. I remember my 7th grade American history class. Our teacher told us about dissent, D-I-S-S-E-N-T. It was a new word to us. He told us that it is our right and even our responsibility as Americans to express disagreement, even with our government. And as a budding contrarian, I kind of liked that. Yet now I hear some of my political leaders implying that dissent is wrong or even that it's treason. I wonder what my 7th grade history teacher would say about that. I say we must stay in the same community. I say we must keep talking with people who disagree with us. I say we must be models, both of the truth as we see it and also kindness in how we express it. I do think the Episcopal Church can be a model for this, since we have such a long tradition of doing so. Makes me glad to be part of this particular faith tradition. We're not the only ones, of course. You can find other open and tolerant religious groups, and I thank God for that. We will not agree on everything. I know that. But we will agree on kindness and on caring and on love, because that is what our God asks of us. One of the prophets that Jesus would have studied was the prophet Micah. And let me conclude with the prophet Micah's great challenge and question. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God?